Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk, where today's topic is Introduction to Warehouse Management. My name is Evan, and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation, and by participating in the session using Microsoft Teams, your name, email address, phone number, and/or title may be viewable by other session participants. If you do not consent to being part of a recorded session, please disconnect at this time. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout the event. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Now let's get started. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Nicole Gunn, Senior Program Manager. Nicole, over to you.
Thanks, Evan. Welcome, everyone, to the Introduction to Warehouse Management Tech Talk. This Tech Talk is meant to be an introductory or 100-level course introducing the basics of using the Warehouse Management module in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations or supply chain management. So if you are looking for a deeper dive on warehouse management or more advanced topics, this may not be the session that you were looking for, but please still feel free to join us or watch the recording at a later time. But do keep an eye on the calendar for upcoming Tech Talks, as we will be doing a series of warehouse management sessions that do go deeper into configuration, as well as some industry-focused sessions as well. All right, let's get started. So our agenda for this session will be to cover terminology, fundamental configurations in warehouse management, our core constructs, the mobility component of warehouse management, and then I will end by doing some business process demos in a Contoso environment. So for terminology, I'm going to start with a few acronyms that are common when working with the warehouse management module. And the first one is WMS, and it's probably the most common one that you will hear. And it literally stands for the Warehouse Management System. And when we are talking about Dynamics 365, that encompasses our warehouse management module, as well as the mobility component, which is our WMA, or Warehouse Mobile Application or app, or you may hear it referred to as WM app. Those are all the same thing, and they're referring to the standalone application that is typically installed and run on a handheld scanning device to be used in the warehouse. The next common acronym that you will encounter is RTW, which stands for Release to Warehouse. This is one of our core processes in warehouse management, and it will be defined a little bit later on in the presentation as well. And then finally, LP, which stands for license plate. Another very common one, if you are familiar with using the old inventory management warehousing functionality in AX or earlier versions of Dynamics, then you will be familiar with the pallet ID inventory dimension, and the LP is similar to that concept in that it is a grouping of items or a like item with maybe different batches of the same item. And the LP is meant to group those together to make movement and processing in the warehouse more efficient. So I'm going to continue with some terminology and some common terms that you will hear when working with warehouse management. So the first one of those is waves. You may also hear the term in the singular as wave or waving or wave processing. All of those are just referring to a collection of order lines that are released to the warehouse at the same time for processing. So that is what we consider a wave. And then a load or loads are our physical shipping containers. So think of this as a tractor trailer that you would ship product out of your warehouse on. And then for shipments, these are individual deliveries to a specific customer or specific delivery address. And finally, work. And work is the transaction that is performed by an end user, typically on that warehouse mobile app, to complete any number of different business processes in the warehouse, from receiving to picking to shipping. So let's review some of the fundamental configurations that are required to use the warehouse management module. So the first several I'll go through here are all item related setups. So the very first one is the storage dimension group. You may already be familiar with that configuration. The important point to note for warehouse management is that there a parameter on the storage dimension group to enable the use of warehouse management. When you do that, it activates a specific set of inventory dimensions that are used in the storage dimension group. And they include dimensions that are not otherwise activated, such as the license plate that we talked about, as well as the inventory status. Another item setup is the tracking dimension group. So the tracking dimension group allows us to use lot control or serialized items with our warehouse management processes. So the important point with the tracking dimension group is that if you're going to use one of those dimensions, that you want to set those to be active, as well as active for physical inventory to be used with warehouse management. And then the reservation hierarchies. These are very important, and they define how our inventory is allocated to demand based on our set of inventory dimensions that were activated in our storage dimension group. They also relate to the tracking dimension group in that if you have active tracking dimensions, such as a batch or a serial, that those dimensions should also be included in your reservation hierarchy, so that warehouse management knows how to allocate the inventory based on those dimensions as well. And I do have an example here, a graphic of a standard reservation hierarchy. So this one does not include any tracking dimensions. So this just includes our core 5 inventory dimensions. The site, warehouse, and inventory status are pictured above this solid line I have drawn in the graphic to indicate that these are the dimensions that the system is looking for when we soft allocate inventory. So this is at the point of order entry or initial reservation of inventory. The system is simply going to look at whether you have enough inventory at the site that's on the order line, in this specified warehouse, and in the specified inventory status, such as available inventory, to meet the demand. The inventory dimensions below the line, location and license plate, are only considered once we release that order line to the warehouse for processing. So in that release to warehouse process, we then get a hard allocation of inventory where the system is actually looking at the specific location within that site warehouse inventory status to direct the user to pick the inventory. And that is the location that then gets assigned to the work transaction. So some additional fundamental configurations that we have. Another one that is item related is the unit sequence group. So the unit sequence group is the only mandatory configuration on the warehouse tab of your release product setup. So this is the one thing that defines our handling units within the warehouse. So on your item, you've got, an inventory unit defined, maybe a different selling unit or purchasing unit, but the unit sequence group is telling the warehouse management module specifically what physical units do you handle the product in. And it may just be one, it may just be whatever your inventory unit is. But if it is multiple, say your vendor ships you, eaches that come in a box, and then they stack those boxes on a pallet, then you have eaches and boxes and pallets all defined within your unit sequence group. The important thing with the unit sequence group is to note that it also works in conjunction with the unit conversions then that are defined on that item. So if I am using those multiple handling units, I also want to define the unit conversions on the item to tell the system not only what units in the unit sequence group, but how many units in the unit conversion. Our sites, warehouses, and locations that we set up represent our distribution network. And I'll explain that a little bit more. We've got a graphic on that. And then our wave templates, location directives, and work templates are our three core configurations that drive what we call the how, where, what of the warehouse processes. I am not going to dive any deeper on these specific configurations in this session, since we are in an introductory session. But if you have questions on these specific setups or are just interested in kind of some tips and tricks for how to set those up efficiently, then we will be having a separate tech talk on deep diving into these configurations. So please look for that in the coming weeks and months. So I've got a couple of examples here for some of the configurations we just talked about. The first one is that unit sequence group. So you can see at the bottom level, so if we read this bottom up, the first unit we define in a sequence group should be our inventory unit. That's very important. So the lowest level should be your inventory unit. In this case, I have eaches. The next unit in my hierarchy here is a box. And you can see from the graphic that in this example, I have 2 eaches that go into 1 box. And then at the top level, I've got boxes that go into a pallet. And again, in this graphic, I have 2 boxes that go into my pallet. So we can infer from this graphic that a single pallet at the lowest level has 4 eaches, even though that's not displayed here. The distribution hierarchy. So this is where we set up our sites and our warehouses and locations. I've depicted it in a pyramid because this is really how we want to think about the setup. So your sites at the very top are a collection of warehouses that are typically within the same geographical region. So that might be something like the Pacific Northwest as my region in the United States. At the next level down in our warehouses, this represents either a virtual or physical space within my distribution network. So if my site is the Pacific Northwest, I may have a warehouse in Seattle. And then underneath of each of those warehouses, I have a collection of locations. And those again can represent a virtual or physical space where our product is being transacted or stored. So a specific location within my Seattle warehouse might be my receiving dock. So that is all for the fundamental configurations. So let's move to the core constructs that are important for us to understand when working with warehouse management. So the first one is that release to warehouse process or wave process that we spoke about earlier in the terminology. So this is kind of our engine within warehouse management that creates work as an output. So our inputs are our demand lines, our order lines, and then it is also considering the configurations that we spoke about, the wave templates, work templates, and location directives. It's putting that into our engine and it's processing everything to create work for us as an output. We then want to understand what are loads, shipments, and containers. So we defined loads and shipments earlier as our physical shipping container and then our deliveries to customer, respectively. Containers are then a loose package that would be the result of either a manual or automated packing process that you may be using within warehouse management. Containers are not always used because packing is not always required in your business process. But altogether, the loads, shipments, and containers represent our hierarchy of transit. There is a graphic on this as well to explain that a little bit more. And then work. Work is our concept. We defined it a little bit earlier. This is our transaction that is comprised of pick and put steps in pairs. So our work templates are what define that structure of the picks and puts. So if you've got staging operations, then there may be additional steps in your work. And here's that graphic that I spoke about for the transit hierarchy. So we want to read this from left to right and think of it as kind of a sideways pyramid where the top of the pyramid is our loads. So again, that's our tractor trailer, our physical shipping container, and it contains one to many shipments within the load. The shipments then, if we expand our pyramid, this is the middle column of shipments, are our deliveries to customers, and they are going to contain one to many containers if I am using that packing process, or just contain the individual order lines themselves. So at the very lowest level, my containers then, or just my individual order lines, have my individual items. So let's talk a bit about the mobility side of warehouse management. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the mobile structure and configuration within Dynamics 365. So these are the configurations within the warehouse management module that you will want to set up in order to use the application, which we will talk about afterwards. So the structure is that we have a set of configurable menus and menu items. So these are the actual buttons or options on the app that the user will be interacting with. There is then a set of default setups that we need to enable. And then we also need to set up our workers in warehouse management. And these are the actual users that are logging in to the mobile app. So here's just an example of that mobile structure. So our menus and menu items. So reading again from left to right, when I log into the application, I may see this main menu that shows me all of the options that I have access to. So here I then drill down into a receiving menu or a shipping menu. If I choose the receiving menu, I then may see a purchase or a transfer menu item that allows me to do those types of receipts. If I back up in the menu structure, and you can go forward and backwards in the application, you'll see me do that during the demos. If I instead choose the shipping menu I may see a sales picking menu item that allows me to pick my sales orders. So I want to review the default setups that we need to enable in the system before we start using the app. So I've put the full menu path for how to get to these forms in the slide deck, and you'll get a copy of this afterwards. But the first one is the warehouse app field names form. The first time that you access this form, it will be blank here in the main section of the form. So when you click the create default setup, it populates all of this setup for you. You do not need to change anything from the default setup unless a requirement comes up that would necessitate that. So for example, if I look at the confirm batch line here, the fourth line in the form, I can see that the input mode is set to manual, meaning if my user needs to confirm the batch, that they've got to manually enter the batch number. If I instead want to change that to scanning, because my batch number is barcoded, say on a label that came either from the vendor or from our manufacturing process, then I can change that to scanning. And then when the user is prompted to confirm a batch, they will instead be able to scan versus being forced to do a manual entry. So you can edit the defaults. The other default setup that we want to create is under the warehouse app field priority. Again, I've included the full menu path here. When you log into this form, it will not be blank, but all of these fields that you see on the right-hand side will initially be on the left under the unassigned fields. And when you select the create default setup button, they will be moved to the right-hand side of the form under the assigned fields, and they will be given these default priority settings. The important thing here to note is that this controls where the user sees information on the app. So the priority 10 is the most critical, and that is displayed to the user on their main tab of the app or the task tab. Any other priority below that, priority 20, 30, 40, all of those show up on the details tab in the app. That is not typically the tab that the user is going to see or work with. So if there's critical information that they need as they're processing, then that information should be on the priority 10. So again, if there's information that's not in the default, you can move these fields up and down in priority. So just know that that is an option. So if I want to move that confirm batch that we spoke about earlier, it's priority 40. If I don't want that to be on the details tab, I could move it all the way up to priority 10, and then the user would see it on their main or task tab in the app, and I will show that in the demos. And then finally, we want to set up our workers. Again, I've included the path to get to this form. These are the users that are actually logging into the app, and not to be confused with the system administration module users or AAD users, and also not to be confused with our HR module workers, because that form is also called workers. But when we create a new record here, it is going to ask us to select one of those worker records to attach our user to. And once we select that worker, we can create a new user in the middle part of the form. And then this is the user ID, and you'll assign a password, which is then encrypted, but can be reset here, to the person who's going to actually log into the app. You'll see that there's like a one-to-many relationship here in the Contoso data. There's a user kind of created for every warehouse that that person's logging into. But the best practice setup here is that we would have many records here, so many worker records, and each of them would have ideally one user ID attached to the worker. And that's just for security, so you can disable users and things like that more effectively. So then as far as the warehouse mobile application itself, you'll see it in the demos, but I've included a screenshot of just the main menu from the Kintoso data. So there is a full Microsoft Docs article out there on how to install the application and how to, register it and set it up and connect it to your specific environment. But you can just go to the Microsoft Store and download the app and use it in a demo mode to get a look and feel of the UI and how the menu structures work. The app is supported on any Windows 10 or Android device. So there is not a specific set of hardware devices that Microsoft recommends that you use. As long as that device supports Windows 10 or Android, you can download the application. You can also just download it directly to a tablet or to your desktop. You will see me using the desktop version, and it's exactly the same version, but you'll see me using it on the desktop in the demos. So I'm going to pause here. Zach, is there anything that came up in the Q&A that you'd like me to address before we go to demos?
No, Nicole, I think we're good. I think you can go forward.
Okay, thanks, Zach. So let's get into the fun stuff. So the business process demos I'm going to cover are just 5 kind of fundamental processes that you would do with the warehouse management module. The first one is receiving a purchase order from a vendor. We're then going to move inventory within our warehouse from location to location. We're going to cycle count inventory within the warehouse. And in this case, it's going to be an ad hoc cycle count, not one that was planned. I'm then going to pick and ship a sales order out of the warehouse, and then turn around and receive a return order from that shipment. All right, so let me switch over to my Kintoso environment. And I'm going to bring up my mobile application as well. So here is the mobile application on the desktop. And this is exactly what it would look like if you log into it from a handheld device as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you a purchase order that I have already created in the system, but it's going to be the one that we are receiving against. So let's take a look at it. So I've got a purchase order from my vendor for 100 pieces of this item A0001. And all of this is just in the Kintoso data. I'm working in warehouse 24. So if you're interested in doing some testing on your own with warehouse management and you've got a set of Kintoso data in your environment, the warehouse 24 is a good one to work with because it is enabled for all of the warehouse management processes. So in my application, if I want to receive this purchase order, so if I am the warehouse worker that is on the receiving dock and a shipment has arrived from the vendor at the dock, then I should have some paperwork, ideally, from the vendor that I can go ahead and start my receiving process with. So I'm going to go into the inbound menu and I'm going to go into purchase receive. So just a note before I begin that the Kintoso data is set up in a 2-step receiving process, meaning I'm first going to have to register the inventory, and then I'm going to do a separate put away process to move the inventory from my receiving dock into my storage in the warehouse. This can be configured as a 1-step process. It is just happens to be a 2-step process in the Kintoso data. So that's how we're going to walk through it. So we're assuming 2 different people are going to do these processes. So purchase receive is the first one. I'm going to scan my PO number or enter it, however the vendor has given you this information. and then the item number as well. And then it's going to ask me what quantity am I receiving. I've already done some receiving against this PO. I'm not going to do the full quantity. I'm only going to bring in, let's say, 30 pieces from this PO. And then this is going to give me an option to verify my item, my quantity, and the unit of measure for this item. I'm going to pause here and just talk briefly about something we mentioned earlier, which is the priority, the warehouse app field priority setup, and how it displays information on the task tab versus the details tab. So you can see here, this task tab is the main one that I'm working in. I've got some information that is displayed to me at the bottom, and that is based on that priority 10 information. If I switch to the details tab, I may see some additional information that is not displayed to me, such as the PO line number, and that would be anything that's in that priority 20 and below on that setup. You will see if I expand this, so if I were working in a tablet view, then you can see that I see both the task pane and the details pane at the same time. I may also be able to see a product image if those are loaded and being utilized in the system. I'm going to collapse this back down so it's more of a application size. So I'm going to go ahead and confirm that this is what I'm receiving for my PO. And it's going to tell me that work is completed. Really what this means in this case is that work was created for me to then complete in the second step of the purchase receiving process, which is the put away. But I'm going to show you that work before we complete it on the application. So at this point in time, if I look at my PO, I have registered inventory. So basically, I've just recognized that that physical inventory has arrived at my warehouse. There has been no financial transaction that has happened. It will not until you actually post a product receipt against the PO later on. That's not necessarily part of the warehouse process, so I'm not going to go through it here. But I do want to show the work that was created. So I've got this open purchase order put away work, and it's telling me that my material handler or whoever's going to move this inventory is going to pick up what I just received from my receiving dock location and put it away into this floor 001 location that was determined through my location directive setup. So I'm going to go back to the application. I'm going to scan this target license plate ID for reference. You know, in a real world scenario, you probably have a license plate label being printed out during that registration process that would include this license plate ID. That way, the person who's going to do the put away would have a license plate barcode to scan as they're going to move the inventory. So I'm still in the inbound menu, but I'm going to go to the purchase put away option this time. So this is my second step. And you'll see this is why I copied that ID, because I don't have a label or a barcode, but I'm just going to do a copy paste to simulate that. I could also scan the work ID directly, but it's not as common in a purchase receiving process that you would, you know, print a put away ticket with the work ID on it. More likely you're going to have the license plate ID. So if I scan the license plate, the application recognizes that this is where that license plate is currently sitting, and this is what's on it. So again, our license plate is representing a group of items or products that allow us to efficiently move them around the warehouse. In this case, it's just one product, but it is 30 pieces of a product. If these are large pieces, then these may be 30 pieces of something that are, you know, stacked and shrink wrapped on an actual wooden pallet, if that helps you to think about it that way. So I'm going to just verify that, yes, that is what I picked up. In the Contoso data, the purchase put away option is set up for what is called user grouping. That allows the user who's doing put away to pick up multiple license plates at a time. So maybe they have a piece of equipment, such as a long fork or turret truck, that accommodates that. And then they would be more efficient in, picking up 2 or 3 pallets at a time and then putting them away instead of taking one, putting it away, coming back to the receiving dock and doing a lot of movement throughout the warehouse. I am not going to pick anything else up in this example, so I'm going to go ahead and say that I am done. And that leads me to the put away. So it's taking me to that floor 001 location and asking me to drop off my license plate there. If I had picked up multiple things, just note that it will ask you to do the put away in reverse order that you picked it up, which makes sense if you think about how you physically would be picking things up on your equipment. The last thing you picked up would be the first thing that you drop off or put away. So I'm going to confirm that, yes, I took this inventory to this floor 001 location, and now it tells me my work is completed. In this case, that really does mean it's completed, because if I refresh back here in Dynamics 365, I see that that work ID is now closed, and I can check my inventory, and I should see that license plate in this floor 001 location. So let's take a look at that. So here is my license plate, and my 30 pieces of inventory are in floor 001. So that is our first business process of purchase order receiving. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the move inventory process. So back in the application, anytime that you need to get out of a task, you go to this hamburger menu, we call it, the 3 horizontal lines, and you're going to click cancel. That will step you back out into the menu you were in. And in this case, I'm no longer going to be doing an inbound menu function. So I'm going to actually click back at the bottom of this menu. And that takes me back to the main menu and allows me to switch to the inventory menu, where I'm going to do a movement. This is just a user directed movement, meaning the user has decided to pick up a certain license plate or part of a license plate and move it to another location that they are going to tell the system. The system is not directing the user in any way in this movement function. So I'm going to go ahead and scan that same license plate that I just received, and it's going to tell me exactly where that license plate is currently sitting. So it's in that floor 001 location, we know, because we just brought that in. So I'm going to actually do a partial movement. You can move the full license plate, but I do want to show this. I'm going to go ahead and just move, let's say, 10 of the pieces. So it's going to ask me, where am I moving those 10 pieces to? So I'm going to pick another floor location. Maybe that floor 001 location was overfilled. And if I wasn't using any type of location stocking limits or volumetrics to control my capacity, then the system may have asked me to take that inventory to that floor 001 location. But when I actually got there, perhaps it was full, and if I did not overwrite it in the purchase put away process, maybe I'm doing the secondary movement. So I'm going to go ahead and scan the floor 005 location. So perhaps this is an empty location that has enough capacity for me to put these pieces. And you'll see that it's assigning a new license plate value for me. And that is because I am not taking the full license plate quantity of 30 pieces. I am leaving 20 pieces on the initial license plate in the initial location. And a new license plate is being assigned to the 10 pieces that I am taking off of that initial license plate. So I'm going to go ahead and confirm that license plate that it assigned. And it's telling me that that work is completed. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. If I refresh my on-hand inventory, I see that that initial license plate now only has 20 pieces. And I should also be able to see my other license plate which ends in 628, has the 10 pieces, is now in the floor 005 location. All right, so that was the move inventory business process. So we're going to move to the third process, which is cycle counting our inventory. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to do what's called a spot cycle count or an ad hoc count. That just means that we did not generate the cycle count ahead of time, which you may do if you're doing recurring counts on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis as part of your typical just business process. This is more of an ad hoc count where maybe a user, if they're walking down an aisle in the warehouse and they see something is damaged, for example, then they may want to just go ahead and do an ad hoc count of that location because maybe they need to take inventory out or just to confirm what is left in that location. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of my movement task. And I am still doing an inventory task. So I'm going to stay in this menu and I'm going to move to the spot counting option. And I'm going to enter in that floor 005 location that we just moved our inventory to. And I'm going to enter in the item that I'm counting. And then it's going to ask me for the license plate as well. It's prompting me for license plate because my floor locations are license plate controlled. If you are not using license plate tracking in your storage locations in the warehouse, then it will not prompt you to count by license plate. That license plate will be essentially dropped from whichever transaction put the inventory into storage, such as that purchase put away. So it's asking me as the user to go ahead and count the quantity. I'm going to say that there's 12 pieces here. I know that's not right. So it's telling me with this lovely video game sound that the count differs from the on-hand quantity. And it's going to give me one chance to retry my count. And that's just based on my configuration of this cycle counting menu item on the app. So I'm going to go ahead and count again. So that retry or recount is just to give the user a chance. Maybe they, had fat fingers when they entered in the quantity the first time and they put 120 and they meant 12. So the recount is nice because it gives them that option to correct it if that was the case. But in this case, I'm going to say, nope, my initial count was right. There's physically 12 pieces in the location that I'm counting. And it's going to go ahead and accept it that time. I am going to say it looks like there's some other items maybe in this location that I am finished counting this location. And then it's going to tell me, okay, you are complete, but do you want to add another LP or item to this location? So anytime you're cycle counting, whether it was a predetermined count that you're processing or an ad hoc count, such as the one we just did, it's always going to prompt you at the end for adding a license plate or item to the location. So this is just the opportunity if the user sees an item, physically in that location that they're counting, that the system did not prompt them to count, meaning the system does not think that it's in that location, then they can go ahead and add it here without doing a separate, inventory adjustment. So that's just giving you the opportunity to add that. I'm not going to add anything in this demo. I'm just going to say, okay. It's going to tell me the work is completed. I counted 12 pieces here. If I refresh this, you'll see that this did not adjust my inventory to 12 pieces. That is because there is a review process for the cycle counts that needs to occur. So as a supervisor or a manager or even an inventory auditor, someone would need to come in and the warehouse management cycle counting menu has some pre-filtered views. And I'm going to go into the cycle count work pending review. You may choose to add that to your favorites or put it on a dashboard in a workspace if this is a function that you're typically doing as, say, an inventory auditor. But this is where I would come to see that cycle count that is now in a pending review status because I just counted it differently than what the system expected. So I'm going to go into the cycle count kind of subform from my work, and it's going to show me everything in that location. Now you can see that there are a couple of other license plates, same item, but a couple of other license plates in that location that I did not count. The counted quantity was 0. For those, I'm not going to do anything with them. I'm going to go ahead and reject the counted quantity of 0. Because I know that's not right because I didn't count them. But for this one that I did count, the system expected quantity was 10. That's what we had moved there from our previous process. And the counted quantity that I put in was 12. So it's showing me the variance by cost. So if that is a determining factor for whether or not you accept or reject that difference, then it is displayed here for you. I am going to go ahead and accept it just to show that a journal is posted to make that inventory adjustment. And you can see the journal number here. And then if I go back into my on-hand inventory, now I should see my inventory has been updated on that license plate to 12 pieces from 10 pieces because I accepted that count variance. All right. Also, if I would go back, let's just close the loop there. I should no longer have anything in my cycle count work pending review because I completed that review. So that is our cycle count inventory process. I'm going to move to pick and ship sales order. I already have a sales order in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that. I've got a couple of items on here that we've been working with. So we're going to pick and ship line 3, which has 24 pieces of this item. The Contoso data has a default reservation policy of manual. So that means I need to reserve my inventory manually or through a batch process, but I'm going to do it manually for the demo. So if I come into the reservation form on my sales order line, I see that I've got 24 and I've got plenty of inventory to fulfill this. So I'm going to go ahead and say reserve lot, and that's going to move my 24 pieces into the reserve physical state. And then I'm going to switch to my release to warehouse form. And I can see that the default view is sales orders, but just to point out, you can also release transfer orders from this form. But we've got a sales order here, and you'll see that the quantity available to release is the 24 pieces, and that is what I have reserved. So it's always important to look at that because if the reservation is missing or has not been completed yet, you'll see that that is 0, or maybe it's a partial quantity. Maybe I only had 18 of my 24 pieces in inventory. And if I'm allowed to do partial shipments to my customer, then I may still go ahead and choose to release just the 18 pieces out of the 24 quantity, which is the order line quantity. So I'm going to go ahead and add this line to my release to warehouse. And I'm going to go ahead and click release to warehouse here. So this is essentially everything at the bottom of the form that gets added to that wave that we talked about. So you'll see these info log messages up here refer to waves as well as work that has been created. So that wave process happened when we did this release to warehouse trigger here, and it took my order line information. It considered all of my wave template, work template, location directive setups, and ultimately it created work for me to complete. So let's go look at what that work looks like. And actually, I'm going to show you from the sales order. and I'm not sure if I showed this from the purchase order earlier, but just this is one of the nice ways to get to the work detail for any specific order line, is to go to the order, highlight the line that you're working with, and then go to the warehouse work details, because this will present you a filtered view of the work that is just related to that order line versus going to the all work or work details form, where you would see all types of work for all different orders, and then you would have to do some filtering to find just this one particular piece of work. So I am going to switch tasks in the app again. I'm going to cancel out of the counting task I was doing, go back out of my inventory menu, and switch to outbound. And I'm going to do a sales picking process here. So in this case, I am going to scan the work ID, because you may be printing a pick ticket that has the work ID barcoded, that you would initiate this process with, because we do have this sales picking set up as user directed, not system directed. If you were in a paperless environment, if you want to save the planet a few trees, then you may choose to not print a pick list and use a more system directed option. But in this case, we are not. So it's asking me to go pick this quantity of 24 pieces that I released from this floor 001 location. We know that we've got inventory of this product just because we've been working with it, moving it around, counting it in other locations, but it is going to direct me to the first alphanumeric location that it finds inventory in. Again, that's just a setup of the location directives, and we can cover that further in the configuration deep dive tech talk. I'm going to scan a license plate value that I know has inventory in that location. And again, it's going to generate a target license plate for me. So much like that partial inventory movement we did, the system is doing this because that license plate that I scanned, that I'm picking these 24 pieces from, has far more than 24 pieces on it. So whatever's remaining is going to remain on that license plate in the storage location. And it's going to assign me a new license plate to take these 24 pieces with me throughout this picking transaction. I'm going to confirm that. And in my process, in my work template, does not have any additional pick put steps as far as, staging or packing. So I'm just going to put this directly to a bay door location. That is my final shipping location. Again, that's a setup of my warehouse management parameters, but basically that is important because it tells the system that is the final location that this inventory is going to be in. So once inventory is moved here, go ahead and deduct it from the physical on-hand inventory. So I'm going to put my inventory there. I'm going to refresh the work just to show you that it is now closed, and you can see that my user ID did this as well. So now that our inventory is at the bay door, I can go ahead and complete this shipping process, which I'm going to move through kind of quickly because I know we're coming up. We just got about 7 minutes left, and I do want to get through the return process as well. So our load is in a loaded status because everything is at our final shipping location. I'm going to go ahead and confirm that just updates my status to shipped. So I would typically do that as my product has actually left, or my load has left my warehouse. I'm going to post a packing slip from the load as well. So this is our financial update of this inventory. It tells me that that was successful. I'm going to go back to my sales order. I can see that it posted that packing slip journal, and I'm going to go ahead and invoice what was packing slip updated. That way I can do a return against the sales order line. So I am just moving a bit quickly through that process so that we can get to the return. So I'm going to go to return orders. I did create one earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and use the find sales order feature to bring in this line. So here's my order line that I just shipped. I'm not going to bring back all 24 pieces. Maybe my customer had an issue with just a half a dozen, 6 of these. Maybe a pack of them were damaged. So I'm going to add that. You'll see I've got a negative quantity on my return. And I'm going to send the return order. That's typically it'll generate a document that you could send to the customer to essentially authorize that return coming back into your inventory. This is our final process. Let me bring this back up. I'm just waiting for it to generate that return order document. So I'm going to go ahead on the application and get ready to receive this return order. So I'm going to cancel out of my sales picking operation, go back in my menu. You can see that if I've got several options, I can scroll through the app. I'm going to go back to an inbound process. And this time we're going to do an RMA receive. It will again be a two-step process versus one step. This is just asking me to generate the document. I'm going to go ahead and scan in my RMA number here. And I can see on my return order authorization form that I've got my RMA number here, 00034, and that's going to be the one that I scan into the app. It's going to ask me for the item. So this flow should feel very similar to the purchase receipt. And in this case, the system is not going to generate a license plate value here. It's going to ask me to assign one. So I may have, a pre-printed roll of barcodes that I can assign. So I could scan that in here. I'm just going to go ahead and type a value. And then it's going to ask me for that quantity. I'm going to put in all 6. And then in the return process, we have this additional function of assigning a disposition code. And this allows you through, again, your location directive setup, which we will cover in a later session, to route these returns to different areas in your warehouse based on the disposition code. In this case, I'm going to pick that credit. It tells me work completed. Again, that kind of means work created in our scenario. So I'm going to cancel out. I'm going to go to an RMA and, not put away. That's the one-step process. I'm going to go to RMA put away. And I will show you quickly. If I go to this return sales order, so anytime you create the RMA, you get the corresponding sales order that's also generated of type return order. And again, I can go to that warehouse work detail to see that filtered view of the return order put away work that was created. So I'm going to go ahead and scan that work ID and enter it into my RMA put away. And again, this should feel very similar to that purchase put away flow where I'm picking up from the receiving dock. I'm verifying the item and quantity I picked up. And it's telling me this time to not put it away into my inventory, but to put it to this return location because maybe I need to do a quality inspection or some other process before I can say that this can return to inventory, or maybe it's damaged, it needs to be scrap, whatever the determination is. So I'm going to put it in the return location, tells me work is complete, and I can see that here, my work is complete. So that's the final process. Let me go ahead and reshare. So these are the 5 processes that we went through: receiving a purchase order from the vendor, moving our inventory between locations in the warehouse, doing an ad hoc or spot cycle count of the inventory, picking and shipping a sales order, and then receiving a return against that sales order. And that's all the content that I have. And I think we're right up against the time. So I'm going to throw it back to you, Evan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We would like to get your feedback on today's session. I've posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel. We value your feedback and welcome your input on how we did today and what you would like to see in future sessions. There's survey scores on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible, and we thank you for your participation in that. As a reminder, the recording for today's session will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter and a thank you to our audience for logging in and joining us today. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.